Skirmishers. It turns out they can fire in combat. This can obviously be very strong, but before I get into the details, I'd like to thank our sponsor today, Okay. They sell watches with handmade leather straps, and if you're interested in purchasing one, you can use code Enticity using the link down below to get 10% off. But back to Skirmishers, it turns out they can be a lot more versatile in melee than you'd think. For example, if you take a Slaanesh Lord and put them up against Chameleon Skinks, you can take them out pretty easily. All you have to do is give her a right click and your Chameleon Skinks will fire through themselves to land their hits. But of course, this isn't limited to just Chameleon Skinks. You can do the same thing with Chameleon Stalkers if you give them a move command. But where this can really get nasty is with Marauder Horsemen and Marauder Horse Masters. If you can fully surround a squishy single entity or lord, all you'll have to do after is wait, and they'll get their shots off without any issues, allowing you to pin down and snipe a target at the same time. However, you do have to be a little bit careful with this trick. If you stack your Skirmishers, they won't fire at all because they're all in the way of each other. And don't expect units that can't fire while moving to do this trick either. But interestingly enough, you can rely on this to work in single entity fights, which means the Burning Chariot of Tzeentch can pretty easily outduel most flyers. Now there are some weird exceptions for which units can fire while in combat. For example, Marauder Horsemen of all types and Scourge Runner Chariots will fire in combat, but other units like all Foot Skirmishers, Alithanar, and even Wood Elf Cavalry Skirmishers will have a very hard time firing while they're in combat. To make sure they fire, you'll have to give a ranged attack command. And to be honest, this trick works on fewer units than you'd expect. It doesn't work for Empire, Wood Elf, or High Elf Skirmish Cavalry, but it seems to work on chariot units, which funnily enough makes war wagons extremely good at killing shielded characters if you can get the surround. And yes, this includes Scourge Runner Chariots too, but outside of chariots, you can see fire in combat, work well for gunnery wights, and yes, this includes rotting Promethean gunnery mobs too, but not deck droppers on the same roster who can also fire while moving. And while we have shown that all Marauder Horsemen can fire in combat perfectly, let's end off by testing the skirmish cavalry of other factions. For Tomb Kings, they won't fire in combat, and despite being a close relative to Chaos, it seems like Beastmen can't either. As for Batonia, the Mounted Yeomen also can't fire in combat, and actually, Kislev can't either. Might as well test Ogre Maneaters too, and as expected, they don't fire in combat, and this puts us in a pretty weird situation. It looks like all chariots can fire in combat, while all skirmishers can't. That is, of course, with the exception of Marauder Horsemen and variants, who are able to completely surround foot characters in melee before finishing them off with point-blank missiles. So I'm guessing this trait on Marauder Horsemen is an oversight, so if you want to have a bit of fun before this gets fixed, you should definitely try surrounding a lord with Marauder Horsemen throwing axes. Even lords as tanky as Vlad will go down after you've used half of your ammo. But while this technique is obviously very strong in sniping lords, it turns out the tankiest one, Sigvald, will just barely survive a single unit of Marauder Horsemen throwing axes.